What if the greatest economic crisis of our time isn't a market crash, a housing bubble, or a supply chain collapse? What if it's something you can't see in a balance sheet, something quiet, personal, and deeply human? Imagine an earthquake that never makes the news. It doesn't topple buildings or crack highways. It moves silently beneath the surface, yet it reshapes everything. Depression is that earthquake, and it's been shaking the foundations of our global economy for years. We don't talk about it, not in the language of money, at least. We talk about GDP, inflation, unemployment rates, but we rarely measure the cost of a mind that can't get out of bed, of a brilliant employee too drained to think clearly, of a generation burnt out before they ever had a chance to build. Because how do you calculate the price of a lost idea? When depression strikes, it's not just personal, it's systemic. It drains economies in slow, invisible ways. Absenteeism is only the beginning. What about presenteeism? When you show up, but you're not really there. You're answering emails, but your thoughts are elsewhere. You're in the meeting, but your mind is foggy. Multiply that by millions every day, and you start to see the cracks. Healthcare systems buckle under the weight of untreated mental illness. Social services are stretched thin. And businesses? They pay a quiet tax. Talent attrition, lost creativity, constant turnover. It's not always written in the profit margins, but it's there. Some researchers estimate that untreated depression costs the U.S. economy over $210 billion each year. That's more than some wars, more than most natural disasters. But unlike those, there's no disaster relief fund, no sirens, just a steady leak of human potential. But it goes deeper. We live in a culture that worships productivity, even when it kills us. You're expected to hustle, to optimize, to rise and grind. There's a strange pride in burnout, like it proves you're serious, committed, worthy. But at what cost? Capitalism, in its current form, extracts value from people until they break, then replaces them. It externalizes the emotional toll. If you can't keep up, it's framed as a personal failure, not a systemic flaw. You're told to be more resilient, to meditate, journal, breathe. But resilience isn't the answer when the system itself is what's making people sick. Think about how economic theory frames us. Rational agents, maximizing utility. But we're not calculators. We're emotional, vulnerable, unpredictable. And yet, the models driving our economies don't account for that. They don't factor in anxiety, despair, or disconnection. That's why behavioral economics, neuroeconomics, even affective science are so important. They don't just study numbers, they study the human experience behind the numbers. What if that became the norm? What if policy started where people actually live, in their hearts, their stress, their silence? Now, consider this on a global scale. In developing nations, mental health infrastructure is often minimal or non-existent. And when it is there, it's underfunded, stigmatized, or inaccessible. But emotional suffering doesn't stop at borders. Depression deepens poverty, weakens communities, and locks people into cycles they can't break. International aid talks a lot about clean water, education, agriculture, but how often does it prioritize healing the mind? We talk about decolonization, yet we ignore how mental health neglect is a kind of economic colonialism, where the emotional burden of systemic inequality is simply ignored. Even in wealthy countries, corporations are waking up to the cost. But the response is often surface level. A meditation app, a one-off workshop, a pizza party on Fridays. These are gestures, not solutions, because no amount of guided breathing can fix a toxic workplace. What people need is structural change, real support, fair wages, psychological safety. Some companies get this. They invest in mental health not as charity, but as strategy. They see that supporting people isn't just good ethics, it's good economics. Because when people feel safe, they think more clearly, they take risks, they invent things. And that brings us to one of the most hidden costs of all. Innovation. Depression doesn't just steal joy. It steals vision. It takes the future out of your hands and replaces it with numbness. And in that space, how many books go unwritten? How many companies are never founded? How many inventions, songs, solutions die in silence? What if the next breakthrough in renewable energy was locked inside someone too anxious to leave their apartment? History shows us that economic collapses aren't just fiscal, they're emotional. After World War I, the trauma rippled across Europe and helped pave the way for extremism. After 2008, the mental toll, especially on working-class families, eroded trust in institutions and redefined a generation's sense of financial safety. When people lose hope, they stop spending, stop investing, stop believing, and that has real consequences. So, what would it look like to build an economy that understands this? Imagine a world where we measured not just productivity, but emotional sustainability, a gross emotional product, not just goods, but well-being. Public policies that gave space for rest, universal mental health income, state-sponsored mental health leave, not luxuries, infrastructure. This isn't utopia, it's survival. Because the truth is, we can't afford to ignore mental health any longer. Not morally, not socially, not economically. The more we pretend depression is just a personal issue, the more we risk everything built on human effort, creativity, and connection. So maybe healing isn't just self-care. Maybe healing is economic strategy. Maybe therapy is infrastructure. And maybe the real economic miracle of the 21st century will begin with people finally being allowed to feel whole again.